When I was 11, my house burnt down at Christmas. While we were rebuilding that house, my family rented out a farmhouse around 10 minutes down the road. This farm had like 40 acres, 10 of which was a grassy field where our landlord kept his cows, and the rest of the 40 acres was all forest. Our landlord told us that the forest would be used as a paintball field, but he had to stop the building process because dumb kids were shooting his cows. Anyways, I was about 12 and my best friend came over. We were dicking around in the barns and decided to walk out and explore the forest. It took us a long time to get across the field, and we had to get through some prickles and barbed wire fence until we could actually walk through the forest. We walked for a while before we found anything actually interesting. We found some old little shacks covered in spray paint and moss. Most were filled with beer cans and random pieces of clothing. We actually found a strap-on in one of them. Anyways, we were walking and climbing in and around all these shacks, and all was going well when I heard my friend scream. It wasn't one of those "I'm joking, I'm gonna spook you" screams either. I shut up and ran over to her, and I looked at what she was looking at. And there it was, kind of hard to see, but tied up to a tree maybe 10 meters away, was a mangled blue body. We didn't stay to investigate. We both booked it as fast as we could back to the house. We didn't give two F's about the prickles or the barbed wire fence. We got sliced up pretty bad. When we got to the house, panting and sweating, we both started crying uncontrollably and told my mom everything. She called the police and they arrived shortly. They went out to investigate, and an officer came back to tell us that it was just a rotting mannequin tied up. But they found 7 dead bodies where the old road had washed out in previous months. He thanked us, and that was that. I read about it in the news a little while later, and all of the bodies were young women, most likely prostitutes. But damn, that day scarred me for life. We have a camp that we visit frequently during the hunting months and about every other weekend in the off-season. To get to our camp, you have to turn off of a major road and onto a gravel road. Drive about a mile, then turn onto another gravel road that's less inviting. It's set between a few other camps, plus some residents that live out there. It's quiet for the most part. There are some coyotes and bobcats. Bobcats are the worst due to their terrible scream. It sounds like a woman crying for help. There has also been a black panther and a few wild dogs. Back in 2013, we were at the camp for Thanksgiving. We hunted, fished, cooked, drank, all that good camp stuff. One night, we're sitting around the fire, swapping funny stories, and just listening to the silence of the woods. As we're talking, all we hear is, "Help me." At first, we thought it was a bobcat. We listened some more and heard it again. It was a man's voice yelling, "Help me," repeatedly. Now, our first instinct was to grab our guns. Second was to go towards the voice. But you never know what you'll encounter in the woods. It was dark and cold. The hunters knew the area very well, so we decided to call the police. We explained everything to the responding officers. The weird part was that we never once heard the voice while the officers were with us. Not a single time. The officers left and we heard the man again, repeating, "Help me." About half an hour later, the officers came back and we didn't hear any call for help. Again, silence. We all decided it was best to go inside our camp for the night. We never ended up finding anything. I've only ever been back to that camp once since then. Thinking about this still really freaks me out. I was traveling solo around the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State and making various stops in the Olympic National Park. I decided to stop in Quinault for the first time and took a random road that dead-ended at a beautiful spot at the edge of the Quinault River. There was an ancient footbridge that leads across the river, but it looked like it might collapse if I tried to cross it, so I decided against it. It was off-season, and I was not in a tourist area, so I was the only one there. It was so unusually hot outside that I decided I needed to get in that water. I backed my car all the way to the edge of the dead-end road and faced it out in the direction I would need to leave. I started hiking through thick brush, down the embankment, to the edge of the water. There was no path. This was a pretty rugged area. It was mid-fall and I didn't have a suit since I didn't plan on swimming, so I just took my clothes off and got in the water in my underwear. I had a nice swim, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was in the middle of nowhere. After about 5 minutes, the creepy feeling was enough for me to want to head back, so I started to climb out. I turned my back to the other side of the river and walked toward my clothes and shoes that I had left behind. When I got out of the water and turned around, there was a big, tall man standing in plain view. Just across from me on the other side of the river, but higher up on his embankment than mine. He was wearing a poncho made of animal pelts, had long hair full of sticks and twigs, and looked like he had been living out in the wild for a very long time. We stood and stared at each other for a while. I was frozen in fear, when all of a sudden he frantically took off in the direction of the footbridge leading across the river. I grabbed my car key, tried to grab my clothes and shoes, but they got tangled up in some blackberry vines, so I left everything behind. I went running up for my life, through thick brush and the blackberries, barefoot in my underwear, trying to make it to my car before he made it across the river. There was no doubt in my mind that he was trying to harm me. When I made it out of the blackberries, I could see he was crossing the bridge toward me rapidly. I got to my car and flung the door open. Just as he arrived, I locked the doors, and he pounded on the hood of my car, screaming and grunting non-verbally. The moment he went for my driver's side door, I hit the gas and took off as fast as I could. I looked back, and he was chasing after me. He must have ran after my car for at least a mile until he faded from view. I was bleeding everywhere from running nearly naked through blackberries. I was wet, unclothed, shaking, and crying. Had I hesitated for a second more, I don't think I would have made it out alive. Even typing this story out again all these years later, I'm starting to shake. I felt like I was being hunted. That was the only way I can describe it. I will never ever go back to that area. Since that moment, I will always bring a hiking buddy with me whenever I venture out into the forest. That day is going to haunt me for life. I have had many years of therapy, and that experience is still as vivid as the day it happened.